Good evening, all. Okay, it is now 6 p.m. I think we can go ahead and start. Most of the members of the commission are here, save one, so we can go ahead and begin. And then real quick, if you didn't check your email, the agenda was sent out earlier. We can do introductions, and then, well, we can vote on just entering in the meeting, but we want to do a quick switch of the agenda. We wanted Jared Demaris to go before the review of the council meeting that happened the other day, and then we can go into the rest of the meeting. So do I have can everyone hear me? Hi, Ms. Warner-Williams.
Hello. Is no one's video able to work right now?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I will try to figure that out. If you want to go ahead and proceed with the
Right.
discussion. Okay.
Okay. Can I have a motion to, guess, adopt the agenda?
Hi, this is Diane Williams. I move that we adopt the agenda November the 8th, 2023, Fair Election Fund Commission's agenda.
Okay, do I have a second? And I think,
Sure, second, Dan.
okay. And I think we also, okay, all those in favor say aye, or just raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay. And again, I think we wanted to just change the order to let Jared go first and then move into Satitra's part about the Fair Elections Commission.
I also want to make a point that I do believe we have a number of individuals participating in the meeting as observers. So I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of that.
Okay. We have Miss Wendy Honest Bay. Are you talking about the other, the public?
The members of the public.
Oh, okay. No worries. Hello, members of the public. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. We're going to go ahead and go through introductions real quick. My name is Jana Parker. I am the chair of the Fair Elections Commission. And then we'll just go through with everyone else introducing themselves. I'll start with the rest of the commission, and then we'll go to staff. Next would be my vice chair, Satitra.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's morning for me here where I am. It's great to be here participating in this meeting. My name is Suchitra Balachandran. I have been a long-time advocate of this program, and I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Satitra. Dan?
Hi, yeah, Dan Smith from Chevrolet and an appointee to this from the council. Again, longtime supporter interested in this financing program, alternative financing program in the county. Thanks.
Mrs. Williams?
Good evening. Excuse me. I'm Agnes Diane Williams, but I go by Diane. I'm happy to be here on the Fair Elections Funds Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Nelson?
Good evening, everyone. Keisha Nelson, member of the commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Jackson?
Hi, I'm Monica Jackson. I'm an appointee from the county executive, Angela Also Brooks, and I'm excited about starting this new commission.
Thank you so much, commissioners, for joining us tonight. Again, thank you to the public. And where would we be without awesome staff? Staff, you can introduce yourselves at this time and go in any order that you so please.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Warner Wiggins. I'm with the Office of Finance.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Terry Bell, and I'm with the Office of Law.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Linda Allen, and I'm also with the Office of Finance.
Okay, and then we have a special guest observer who is also a panelist today. They will not be presenting, but if you could introduce yourself, please, Miss Honesty Bay.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you all can hear me. My name is Wendy Honesty Bay. I am the acting elections administrator for Prince George's County Board of Elections.
Thank you for joining us, Miss Honesty Bay, and thank you for joining us on short notice. And we look forward to having you at our next meeting so that you can give a little bit more insight to the Board of Elections and how they would implement this particular program. Again, we thank you so much for joining us on this short notice.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And again, thank you to the public. Sorry that you can't see our faces, but we're working on that right now. Right now, we are going to have a presentation from Jared Demarinis, and I'm going to let Satitra do a brief intro and then go right into Mr. Demarinis's presentation. This is to give us more of an understanding holistically from a commission standpoint and a community standpoint about the fair elections law and legal perspective, particularly about how it is in the state and then moving forward in the county level. So go ahead, Satitra.
Thank you, Jana. I am very glad to introduce Mr. Jared Demarinis, who really doesn't need an introduction. He has been engaged in the in moving this legislation forward at many levels in the government, at the state and the county. At the state level, Mr. Demarinis was involved with helping to shepherd the enabling legislation, which allows counties to set up a small donor program. And this was in 2012. And I hope Mr. Demarinis can sort of walk us through the history of this and how it happened and what the motivation was behind all of this. And Mr. Demarinis is, was also an invitee by the county council on at least 2 separate occasions as our legislation was being discussed and enacted in 2017 and 2018. So without much ado, Mr. Demarinis is now the administrator of the state elections administrator. And so please, could you walk us through the program, tell us what the involvement is of the state, key points of what we should be thinking about here in this commission, and anything else that you would like to add.
Sure.
Welcome, Mr. Demarinis. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for such a warm introduction as well. I can't believe this. This is actually, the day is here. I mean, I remember when this bill was passed in 2018 with the idea of the 2026 election, that it seems so far away. So, but I'll give you a brief little history of how long this has been brewing to get to this point here. It actually goes back to 2011 when the General Assembly established a commission to study campaign finance laws, at which point it was almost 2 years in the making. But on December 31st, 2012, the commission issued its final report to the General Assembly. And in that final report, it recommended that the counties be authorized to establish their own public financing programs. In 2013, the General Assembly passed and the governor signed HB House Bill 499, which was the Campaign Reform Act of 2013. And that, officially gave county governments enabling legislation to implement public financing programs. In that law, it was basically Election Law Article 13-503. It allowed the county in the state to establish a public financing system for elected offices in the executive and legislative branches of the county government, and that program has to be administered by the chief financial officer of the county and subject to regulations and oversight by the State Board of Elections. Wendy, I'm going to tell you this, you're not going to have a lot of a role in this entire program here. So I know that you'll be breathing a sigh of relief now as I told you that.
Well, I was interested and they asked me to join this morning, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely, because I'm, curious to know. I know this is a new, a new venture, so I was
exactly
eager.
But you do have a small little role, but I'll tell you about that. But it's nothing that's outside of your normal processes.
Yeah.
So with it, so that's where the history of the program has occurred, and each county has the ability to opt itself. Montgomery, of course, was first out of the with it. Ready for it adopted it in 2014 and was for the 2018 election. Prince George's adopted the legislation in 2018 to be implemented until the 2026 election. So this will be your first, go inside the process here.
Right.
We are we collaborate, the state and the county government collaborates on how to administer and enforce the public financing program. So as one of the things is, instead of all candidates have to file campaign finance entities, instead of filing as a candidate committee, a traditional candidate committee, they establish what is known as a public financing committee, which incorporates notice of intent for a candidate to file, so that they file that electronically with the state at the time of the establishment of the political committee, that they are now saying that they're intended to participate in the program and will abide by all its rules and regulations. The state then administers the program to the candidate to file its reports, as well as to upload all its receipts for contributions and expenditures. When a period of time when the candidate and the eligible contribute.
Mr. Damaris,
Yes.
you're kind of going in and out a little bit. Just wanted to let you know.
Okay, sorry.
Mhm.
So when he reaches the thresholds of qualifying contributions to be eligible, I guess my internet connection is unstable, it says, so I'm sorry if I go in and out. They will be able to file the report. The state will review the report and then submit a letter over to the Department of Finance telling the county that they have qualified and that they were certified candidates in the program, and to disperse the funds from the fair election fund to those candidates. The candidate then can periodically, every 2 weeks, the first and third Tuesday of a month, depending on certain months, because there's normal reports that have to be filed in an election year, that they can seek more funds. At the end of the report, at the end of the cycle, monies are returned back to the county, and the state will work with the county in order to audit those reports with them. But it is the county's then responsibility to audit and make sure that the accounting is appropriate. What we do now is a couple of things. One, we help with the commission in drafting a summary guide, which we have done with so far in Montgomery County and Baltimore City. Available. These summary guides are basically twofold. One, it gives an overview of the program, what constitutes matching funds, what the I would say the rate of for matching is, when distributions can occur, qualifying periods, when receipts of submissions can be for the primary, for the general election, when you need to file your notice of intent and certificate of candidacy. That's all in there, as well as key things on how to establish a candidate committee with us, a public financing committee. We have step-by-step instructions on that with the website there, and graphics, so that people understand what they need to do. And the other more important part about this is how to file a report, and linking contributions and expenditures to each individual transaction, and also coding the contributions correctly. All this activity here now is basically, we don't necessarily look at individual transactions. We pull it, it has to be coded correctly because of the time crunch between when a report is submitted for us to review and notify the candidate and to just, distribute the funds. We have also what constitutes an electronic signature, which is something that the county can adopt because this is their program. What we've always done for electronic signatures, because a lot of campaigns now just do credit the internet, is that it has to be something that the contributor, must manually enter in their initials or their name to constitute an electronic signature, rather than just checking a box. That knows that they're attesting to certain activities here, that the contribution is in there, that it's used from their personal funds, that they're not using they're not getting any reimbursement for this, and it is not from businesses or political action committees or labor organization or any other prohibited entity from for this program here, and that they certify that a resident of, in this case, Prince George's County, so that we would then be able to match it correctly. Each contribution that is reported is then spot to make sure, and we then process it. At the end of it,
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part? You kind of went
so
out.
then the campaign would then upload that receipt to that individual transaction. It would be linked so that when we review the filing, when the campaign looked for certification, we can see and spot check those receipts are correctly linked. If a campaign submits contributions without contribution receipts or contributor cards, then those contributions are not matched and do not count towards the thresholds. There, I think as we get closer to things, there are some points where we then, besides the commission has to create a summary guide of the program here. We also recommend the creation of frequently asked questions that the commission has to adopt and to move forward about. Most notably, especially when it comes to first-time programs here, what you have is candidates who wish to participate in the program that have been raising in the traditional manner, right? And then as it gets closer to the election, wishes to then participate in, and this is county by county, so this is strictly how you want to interpret your law or how you want to proceed. But basically, if a candidate that wants to participate files, say today, right, and can they go back to contributors that have already given to them in this election cycle? Because as you know, Maryland is a 4-year election cycle starting on January 1st, 2020. So it basically started this year. But if they had raised any money from, can they then subsequently go back to those contributors and see if they would up to $250, or it would be prohibited because they had already given them too much money or exceeded the limits in the traditional manner. Counties differ how to approach that. So I think that's one of the bigger issues that you want to address. That if the campaigns for candidates, one thing that has done is said that if you participate in the program and you have that traditional account, as soon as you sign the declaration of intent and open up the new political committee for public financing, the other one is frozen and you can no longer use those funds for any act, and you just have to file reports, just really attesting to the fact that no money accounts or money spent out of those accounts. and that all your activities will be done through financing account. Another thing that as a best practice was that as committees try to form, the Department of Finance notify them and establish them as vendors, so electronic payments can be done in a quick and timely manner. With it, they usually send out welcome kits to them saying, we need your EIN number, your bank account information, things that they would set up as a normal vendor for the committees. So that, you know, when they get letters, they can send it and they don't need to write physical checks to them. I think that's, I would say, the bigger issue here for the county board of elections. Wendy's role in all this here, basically, the candidates would file their normal certificate of candidacy in your office. They will there, and instead of checking for a candidate committee, you would be checking for a public financing committee. But it's still in the same system for you to verify off of. But that's just one of the little difference there for you. But aside of, you really have no role in its in the establishment of the public financing committee, whether they meet the certification requirements, or if they didn't participate in the primary election, that they qualified for general election. Any of that is all done with the state board and the county Department of Finance.
Okay.
But with that, I'll just open it up for some questions, and happy to answer them. No,
I know it's a teacher.
Sorry, I would have had the video on earlier, so sorry.
No worries. I know it's a teacher probably has a couple of questions, but I did want to answer a question that was written in the chat by a blessed lady. She said, are these public funds and what is the source of the funding? To be clear, that this particular commission was appointed after the passage of the Fair Elections Bill through the county council. Subsequently, this is a small donor matching program. And so the people in the county would donate to a particular candidate, and then there would be matching funds provided through a fund set up from the county that they put into that. And so another question came up was, how do you verify different types of contributions, specifically cash, checks, or credit cards, in regards to filing donor receipts? That came up.
All the receipts, they have to be signed by the contributor. So if it's a cash one there, the campaign has to get a contribution card that the contributor donated X amount of dollars in cash, signed by the contributor. Credit cards, the same thing. Every transaction has to have a contribution card, or a receipt in this case, signed by the contributor that is uploaded to it. But cash is limited to $100 for transactions. You can't, that's state law, so you can't go over $100 for that. And but it is acceptable.
So teacher, I see your hand up.
Right, so first, apologies for not turning my video on. I'm sitting in sort of a darkened space, so you wouldn't really see anything if I turned it on. So you're saying, Jared, that the treasurer plays a really important role. I mean, they always do, but this is an even more important role because there are small contributions coming in. And the philosophy behind the program is that we are trying to encourage folks who have not, who find themselves kind of disenfranchised by the current state of governance at various levels in the country, trying to get them back into the system, trying to get them encouraging them to both contribute and to engage and to further the cause of democracy. So in that context, I just wanted to make a note that Prince George's program stands out in giving a very large match to the smallest dollars. And so the first $25 are matched 7 to 1. So if a resident of the county contributes $25 to a publicly financed candidate, the candidate will find themselves getting $200 because the match will be $175. The other counties do not give such a large match, and ours is particularly skewed in this direction so as to encourage small contributions from very small people, or people who are seen as very small in our society. I wonder if you had any comments to that, and I had a couple of questions.
I mean, yes. So the point of the public financing programs is to basically, at this point here, I would say, allow more residents to run for office and reduce the influence of large contributions from businesses, political action groups, and other large corporations. So, it's more grassroots oriented. It encourages voter participation because, statistically, when people give money, then they're most likely to, vote. So it helps with voter turnout, and it forces candidates to meet certain thresholds, not just monetarily, but also individual contributors as well. So it's not like you can say, oh, I just need to raise, I think, like $50,000, but there's also, for example, the county executive, you have to not only raise $40,000, but you have to raise it from 500 qualifying contributions. For at-large county council members, it's 250 qualifying contributions and $15,000. So it's, you have to make sure that you have some sort of grassroots support in order to qualify and to participate in it.
I don't know if others have questions before. Yeah, I think Dan is in.
Oh, I just following up a little bit on that. Does the state have any like contribution system template or recommendations? Because it sounds like this is going to be a lot of work and effort to get these contributions, which is understandable, and that's part of the process. Could we come up with recommendations to help folks new to this to set up their own systems, or are there some off-the-shelf kinds of things that you can recommend and help us with?
So everything is done through MD Chris. Well, the candidate, so by state law, you have to file your campaign finance reports using the state system. This is where the state oversight comes in. So the program itself that's why you have to establish the campaign account, just like you file a regular campaign account with the state. It's the same sort of program. If they want to go out and use third-party software to upload transactions into the system there, that's on the third-party software to kind of adopt to our format and to make sure everything is uploaded into the system. But you use the current filing program in order to file your reports, which is why that information is in the summary guide, how to code things correctly, how to upload and link transactions, and with each individual entry.
So, but the follow-up there would be, so in terms of, so I understand in terms of uploading like a campaign, uploading and communicating with your office, but does that include the part in which they're actually getting the donation and putting it into their bank account, or
that's on the campaigns, how they do that. I mean, each individual, we just supply the filing program to them to make sure that it's how to report it and how to move forward. But most campaigns, just like a regular campaign, it's a bank account. The one thing that we do help though with is the language on contribution cards and what is acceptable. In the past, campaigns have come to us and have we have looked at receipts prior to submission and given them, this is where we give them over to the commission and they basically review it, or the Department of Finance, for compliance purposes, because that's a county rule, not a state law. For example, like another like enforcement issue would be whether or not, what if a candidate does not participate in one civic debate? Because that's a requirement for this program here. Does that then, void out their in the program? So that would be something where we would work with the county, or the county would take the lead on, because that's specifically for the program, not state law.
So I was wondering if you followed the CB 76, which was just passed yesterday, and can speak to differences between the two bills, or if you haven't had time to do that yet.
I have not had a chance to read the two.
Okay, all right. So just getting back to Dan's point, I think candidates, and you can tell me if this is how you see it too, Jared, candidates run very different campaigns when they run publicly financed versus traditional, in the sense that you want to take your message to the most people, and the money flows in without your having to concentrate on raising money separately from getting your message across to people, which is how it is traditionally done now. Because I'm reminded of, I shared the briefing videos through a folder with all of you on the commission. It's worth listening and watching what people who testified before the council, and these are not just, residents of the county, but these are people who work on such projects. They testified before the council. And I remember one of them, who was a candidate, saying that she launched her campaign at the Langley Park Farmers Market. And she spoke to people who come with food stamps to buy food. And they had never seen themselves as donors to anything. And when they realized that a candidate to the council was coming to speak to them about her message and her campaign and what she wants to do when she gets into office, they were inspired. And when they knew that their $5 would be matched, I think she spoke from Montgomery County, her $5 would become $25 to the campaign. They were tremendously excited. And people who engage in this fashion in campaigns then go and talk to their neighbors. You can go and speak to community groups where you may not have ever gone to before. And it just changes the face of how campaigns are run, and in some sense, who gets into office.
I think that's a very good, yeah. I think it's a very good point. I just want to make sure that we're asking all the technical questions. I know, Sateetra, you may have had more, but I wanted to just check against my notes in regards to two of the things that you said that the state does is help with the writing of the summary guide with the commissions, as well as the frequently asked questions. And then you said you help the candidates in regards to their language around the campaigns. Is there any way, as we go through this process, that we can actually kind of get that information as well to put in our frequently asked questions in relation for them to already understand that this is how they should frame their campaign questions?
Sure. I mean, it's available on our website. If you go to that on the county page there, it's, we post. Let's see if I, okay. If you go to the campaign finance tab on the State Board of Elections website, there's another little section called County Public Finance Programs, and we usually post the law. We have 2 videos there for how to help candidates how to file reports, and you have now 3 different examples of what a summary guide looks like. It's basically the same format. We give it to you as a Word document, and you kind of put in. My sections haven't changed. It's the same sort of program, but it's your sections that kind of get changed in there as well. And the frequently asked questions are all at the bottom there. Usually that's posted as well as on my website, but also on the county website as well, to help facilitate questions. And as candidates get questions, we go forward with it. We also have some sample contribution cards and receipts in there, just model language, but that's on them to kind of follow. And, you know, sometimes vendors or things are slightly different, and so they can check out, they can verify with us to see if it meets all the requirements of the program.
Okay. I think Dan is the teacher again.
Yeah, I think so. A question on the a finance question or a budgeting question. So we are, you know, we're charged with making a recommendation to the budget offices in the county on the amount that we think is a adequate amount that should be in the fund for this. Sort of two questions on this, and one is, are you aware, do we also need to make a recommendation about the administrative part? So, you know, I think May's been focusing on what is the fund amount that we believe, and this is one thing we would like, you know, some assistance or guidance or feedback on from the other counties and from your office. But do we also need to make the recommendation for staffing? Or I presume that the Office of Finance here would sort of take the lead in doing that, but I just wonder if you've, how that's working in the other counties, because I understand there's, you know, there's an amount that the county has to budget for the administration by your office.
Yes. So I'll take the latter and the former. I would say, yes, I think one, as this program needs to develop, you'll get a lot more questions, and there'll also be, I would say, outreach portions of it to help candidates and go to forums to promote and to answer questions on it. That would be where I think an additional staff member is necessary for this to continue. For example, I think Montgomery County had hired a contractual person for you know, a 2-year period, you know, starting, it'll be, you know, for the election, just so that they can answer any and all questions that relate to it, press questions, and attend forums for candidates to just kind of go over the basic requirements of what is needed for the office. That's something that I agree with and need. And, you know, with the Department of Finance there, usually there's always a point person that we work with on that to administer the funds, and then they usually have a second person that would also help audit the account afterwards when we give them all the records for them to review. The first part of your question, which was making a recommendation for the office, one of the bigger things is what, you know, it says, you know, it's, for example, county exec is $750,000 for the primary, including the primary or a general election. Montgomery has determined that language means it's 750,000. It would be 750,000 for the primary, 750,000 for the general. Howard has said that it means both, so that was the maximum the person can give. So that's just something that would need to be clarified. The program has the participation rate for the first time around, I would say, differs based upon a lot of factors on the ground. Montgomery had its first year in existence, had over 40 candidates apply for the program, of which half were certified. It does take a while to get certified. So they budgeted originally $11 million for it. And I think we only spent in the first one there under, I'm going to say 7 million of that there. Howard, in its first iteration, had 7, candidates, I believe, file a declaration of intent, of which 5 qualified for the program. And it was, I would say something in the lines of, $2 to $3 million that was spent. I would say one of the bigger things was facing, how many open seats you see. The lack of incumbency is a factor, because more candidates will try to participate when it's an open seat rather than versus an incumbent. And so I think that kind of weighs into it. But overall, I think you're looking at, if you budget in the $5 million to $6 million range, you would be well suited, and you have even less of a match than Montgomery at this point here. But that's kind of where, initially where I kind of see it. It'd probably be even lower at that point.
Okay, thank you.
As a teacher.
Yeah, so just to follow up, and I think we should have, happy to have other people weigh in on this. So you're saying, since we're already a year into the cycle, and there is only a small amount, I think there's $500,000 in the budget right now, that we should be working on determining, based on what other counties have done and how candidates have reacted. You're saying you're not expecting much difference here from other counties, and we should take that into consideration when we figure out what our recommendation should be to the
it's definitely, I think that it's important to have this recommendation. You're more the experts on, what offices are up in the county, and also the more of, like I said, the more open seats there are, usually there's greater participation in it, versus when you have an incumbent filing for office on that. So that was one of the biggest determinants, I would say, factors in Montgomery County and in Howard.
I also appreciate the point you made, that there is actually a fairly high hurdle you have to jump over to get qualified. And if people think they can just come in and there's public matching funds and they'll run for office, it's not that simple, because the campaign you have to run is very people and community oriented, and they have to support you. If they don't support you, I mean, it's almost like an election at that point. Are you successful with your message in getting the small donations that you need, that will enable you to get contributions, right? And so, I mean, for a lot of new candidates, it may not be that simple, but on the other hand, it may be that you already have a great deal of community support, and what you lack is the large donations that come in traditional elections. And I'm once again kind of reminded of the first bill sponsor, Mary Lehman, who many years ago, again in one of the briefings, laid out that she raised $40,000 when she first ran, of which 20,000 was a loan to herself, right? So it's very difficult, I think, to raise for normal, community-oriented candidates to raise the money that they need to run for elections. And so I think it will take us all some time to wrap our heads around this and say, how is this beneficial, and where does it go? So I appreciate very much Dan's questions. Anything else you have, Dan, along these lines that we need to get information about?
Yeah, well, maybe anybody else has questions.
I think Ms. Williams had a question.
Yes. My question is, before we make recommendations, should we not go to our finance office and ask them to provide us what they think is needed to make a fair assessment? Should we have input from our finance as what is needed before we start making recommendations?
Well, actually, sorry, ma'am, I'm going to interject for a minute. My name's Leroy Maddox. I'm the legislative officer for the county council on these issues. Now, under section 10, 331, Office of Finance does provide staff support to the commission to work with the State Board of Elections to administer the system and to provide information about the system to candidates and the public. So that's already within the requirements of the already existing law, which is CB 99 of 2018.
Attorney Maddox, I think Ms. Williams, if you would allow me to, I think what Ms. Williams is trying to get to is that she's saying before we submit a recommendation, we should get some sort of briefing or numbers from the Office of Finance. I think she's trying to get that hard answer from Mr. Damaris, while also understanding what you're saying, that the support is already written in the bill. So if we ask them, they should be able to give it as well. Am I hearing you both correctly?
Exactly.
All I was doing was just clarifying the parameters, and it seems that trying to get this information from the Office of Finance should be within the parameters of the law. And but I did have a question. I guess it was Mr. Smith. You brought up the recommendations. You were I guess a question as to whether it's beyond just how much money is needed in the fund. I think you were asking, is there like administratively, I don't know, infrastructure or structure in the administration? Am I correct, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I mean, just the what you just described, like the staff to work with the board and do the outreach. Is that, yeah.
Okay.
I just want to make sure we don't get blindsided and say, oh, you're supposed to include that in a recommendation, and hopefully that we would need guidance on that. I mean, we have some ideas about maybe this, how many people or what we would like them to do in outreach, but I would hope you could give us those numbers. But I just wonder, we have to include that in our recommendation.
Well, I would say in the funding part, that's where you would capture, this is part of the funds necessary to implement the public finance system. So in that realm, you could build in, okay, we need X number of people to be able to assist in helping to implement the public finance system. So you would do it in that way via the funding part. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, you may, it's not necessarily administration per se, but it'll end up being administration because you need funds to have those bodies there to help you implement the public finance campaign finance system. Do you understand what I'm saying now?
I think I do, but I have a clarifying question to this. So what you're saying is, and when we submit our recommendations for the funding for this program, to put in there any thoughts we would have around administration or administrative costs. And my question in regards to that is, based on your knowledge of the bill, is that separated out, or is that something that once we give it to them and let's say they put the money in the pot, they know that the money in the pot is also going for administrative costs as well as to
you would have to articulate that in the recommendation. So like I said, while you're not doing admin per se, you end up doing it via the funding mechanism. Okay, like you say, you need X number of bodies to process, so forth and so on. You know what I mean? Something like that.
Well, I was reading somewhere, and it's so much stuff to read, so I can't quote exactly where it was, that they do have staff. Finance does have staff to do this. So they should be the ones that will come up with the dollar amount of what they feel that they can allocate to their staff. I don't think we should recommend to them.
Well, it's actually probably, you'll probably have a dialogue with Office of Finance on that.
But I think they need to recommend to us what is needed in addition to the information that we have, so we can come back and make a full decision as to what we want to recommend, not just our part. Finance is kind of the driven vehicle of this, so they would need to provide us a lot of information so we can include it in the information that we have to make recommendations. So that's why I'm asking that. That's why I was asking the gentleman that should not finance be involved in providing us what we need to assist us in making recommendations for the funds.
They should. So that's not a problem. And that loops into what my question was. So yes.
Okay. Does anyone have any, so teacher, I see your hand up. Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Damaris? I want to make sure that we let him get through that as well as move on to the rest of our agenda.
Yeah, I wanted to guess his comment on this in the context of what other counties have done. Have they worried about staff financing? Has the Fair Elections Commission worried about staff financing? Or, you know, because the Fair Elections Fund, to my understanding, is what the commission recommends the county put into the budget for the candidates and not to run the program. Is that correct?
Well, I think that there's two parts to that. And I think Mr. Maddox talked about the fact that it was in the law. So I won't answer the second part because that's a legal question about the law there. But the two counties so far have that have implemented it. Montgomery had no issues, getting an individual for outreach on that, and Howard, I think, just made it as a part of a person's. They used additional staff for outreach programs if they came up on that. So I think that's where that lied there.
Thank you. And I also wanted to say that Ms. Wiggins is the one organizing this call, and she's from the Department of Finance. And also to point out the Department of Finance, the Office of Audits and Investigations in 2018 issued a fiscal analysis of the program in which they looked and said, what would it cost if there were 2 candidates per seat? What would it cost if they were more? I think they analyzed the number of candidates who ran in the 2010 and 2014 elections and how many candidates had put their names forward to run in the 2018 election. So there is an analysis along those lines that has dollar amounts attached to it. But I mean, if Ms. Wiggins wants to say something on behalf of that.
Well, I think that we're going to cover this a little bit more in the agenda when Dan does his presentation. And so we can get into the nitty gritty about it then. What I will say is that in context of this conversation, we all have to understand in relation to the legislation that they put forth and the late start of this commission, there is a lot of time-sensitive information and decisions that have to be made. And this is not our fault, right? This is not anything that we did. But because the commission was put together so late in the election cycle, and then there are decisions that need to be made tied to this upcoming election cycle and letting candidates know certain things, we're going to have to make some very interesting decisions in a short period of time. And the Office of Finance is going to have to, provide us as much as they can within that time period. Dan?
Yeah, one more question, Mr. Damaris. In our law, it says that 1 year prior to the primary election, the director of the Office of Finance has to make a declaration whether there's enough money in the fund to support, a reasonable number of candidates that are filed or likely to file. And that if the determination is made at that time that there's not, then they're authorized or directed to reduce the amount of funds that would be distributed. And I think there's not a lot of detail in how that would be done, but I'm just wondering, have any of the other elections so far had more, not had enough funding?
No. So far, everyone has had it, and even on the state level as well. We've with the gubernatorial program. So right now, Montgomery, like I said, budgeted 11. They only used about 7. Howard budgeted more and used less. And Baltimore City right now, I don't know how much is budgeted for them on that front. That you would have to contact their Department of Finance, but so far no one has. The program has not ever no program has ever run out of money on that. So yeah.
Just following up though, the analysis that was done for the fiscal note for the 2018 by the by County Office of Audits and Finance, or by the county administration at the time, had a scenario that was just mentioned of having two fully funded candidates for each of the offices, and they came up with in that 3.65 million. And I think some of us are a little nervous because we only have 500,000 in it so far, and there are only 2 fiscal years to appropriate before we hit that threshold the year before that the finance director has to make this determination. So that's what we're looking at, and kind of that's our starting point in terms of input for what we should be funding.
So I guess the biggest one there was Montgomery, and I mean even Howard to a certain extent had limited funding years out, but made major, I would say, budgetary appropriations for it closer to the election, because I guess one of the bigger things was, and you can ask the other counties this, was because distributions didn't have to occur until 1 year prior to the primary election. They didn't necessarily feel the need to allocate or hold funds in abeyance during that time frame, when they said that we'll just do it, that the fiscal year that in which we need to make that occur. So I would say, it seems par for the course, but you could probably contact David Crow over at Montgomery County as the fiscal officer in the program there. And it used to be Diane Zagorski over at Howard County. She had moved into the state and now is back to the county in Howard County. So, but David Crow is probably the one that has done it twice with me in Montgomery County and is a good resource. So, but if that's the last question, I thank you.
We thank you too. Thank you for being on here for an hour. And we could just, what we'll do, Mr. Damaris, is if we have any questions, we'll just send you a follow-up email. We do appreciate your time with us tonight. Thank you so much for coming by.
No problem. Thank you. And I'll always be available. So take care. Bye.
Thank you. We're going to move along in our agenda. We're going to have Satitra give a summary of the bill that just passed, which is the Fair Elections Commission bill. Give us a summary of it, talk about the differences that have came through. And then after that, we're going to move into comments and a presentation from Dan about the financial aspects of the bill. And then finally, just a discussion informing candidates with open campaigns about the legislation, and then conclusion. It's really important that we actually discuss the financial aspects of it starting today, because we need to have a large discussion and kind of come up with some recommendations, to be honest, in the December meeting. And we can have more conversations via email and things of that nature. The reason being is that essentially this budget cycle starts for Prince George's County in the January time period. And we want to make sure we have recommendations for them as they, look to the budget. So I'm going to let Satitra go, and then we'll go into Dan. And I thank everyone for remaining on the call.
Yeah, thanks. I'll keep this really brief, and then I will put a short PowerPoint that I have on into the folder so people can read it. There's just a couple of changes that I want to highlight, and I'll just say that. The first is that the original bill restricted any contribution that the candidate could make to their own fund to $6,000 from the candidate as a contribution, not as a loan, as a contribution, in case you want to jumpstart your program, the money you need for initial expenses to do the outreach, to set up a website, et cetera, whatever you can think of that candidates would do. It restricted it to a $6,000 contribution from the candidate to their own fund, and this has increased it to $6,000 either as a contribution or as a loan from the candidate and spouse to their campaigns. And the other piece that has been done is there's kind of a somewhat complicated way to determine what candidates with existing campaign accounts should do when they run for office, and that requires and I think it's sort of trying to close the loop of how people may spend monies initially and then declare they're running publicly financed, and so it has some restrictions on that. So I'll put that into the PowerPoint, and then we can chat about it probably the next time if we want to. That the CB 76 passed yesterday with 9 votes in favor and 1 abstention. So that is the current law. So let me just stop at that point, and then we can move on to how much time do we have, Jan?
We have a good amount of time. We have about 58 minutes, but I wanted to clarify it wasn't an abstention. He voted against it. It was 9 to 1, and 1 person voted against it.
Oh, I see. Okay. I was told it was an abstention. I didn't listen to it. So thank you.
And I encourage those on the call as well as the community members and the commission members to go back and kind of watch that video. It happened yesterday. To just kind of see the discussion and understand where our council members are on the issue, as that we are going to present to them at some point. Before we continue, does anyone have any questions around the bill that just passed, or any discussion points for anything like that?
Hi, I just want to make a point just on behalf of the Office of Finance. I want to make it clear that unfortunately we have very limited capacity to do things such as reporting, especially with the fast turnaround time. I just want to kind of mitigate expectations around that. We don't have excess capacity for those types of tasks. I know it was written into the law, but we don't have a body available to do that type of work, especially with a fast turnaround. So I'm just putting that out there again to mitigate expectations around the amount of support we can provide, especially this time of the year. As it's mentioned, this is our heavy audit season, our heavy budget season. And so it would be very difficult for us, especially between now and January, to put together any kind of substantial reporting that may be needed. So to the extent that there's information publicly available to the council or to the commission, we would ask that you make use of that information. We understand that there are certain tasks and information that would only be readily available to an employee of Prince George's County, and we're happy to provide support in that capacity. But I just want to make sure that that's clear before too much is tasked to the office.
Okay. So in that capacity, so teacher, I see your hand up, and I feel like you have a question related to this, but I kind of wanted to just get clarification based on what Ms. Williams asked earlier. I know that from what I heard, it's just wanting to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and getting the information from the Office of Finance in order to ensure that our recommendations are, best suited for what we're going to give. Because what we would hate to do is, our own math and homework, which we're very confident in since we've been following this bill since forever, right? We'd hate to do our own math and homework, and then the Office of Finance come back and say, oh, well, in actuality, that's not something that we can do or we can allocate or we can support. And I think to the context of the question that was brought up earlier, it's basically saying like, okay, well, and not in let me, because I don't want it to come off a certain way. Like what can you do? Because at the end of the day, oh, go ahead, Mrs. Williams. I think you wanted to, I think, yeah.
But the mere fact that that information that you provided in 2018, we're just asking.
That didn't come from the
Yeah,
Office
that
of
didn't
Finance.
come from the Office of
It came from the Office of Audits and Investigation. So they were tasked with coming up with the number. And so this didn't come from the Office of Finance. And so because it didn't come from them, but they are the people that they are the office that is helping us, they're basically articulating like, hey, that didn't come from us. We're not going to take, credit for that. But it did come from a Prince George's County Office of Audits and Investigation. We will be utilizing that as we go into the discussion. But to Mrs. Williams' point, like,
But since your staff, can you get that information for us? Since it was 2018 and now it's going to be 2023, we want to make sure when we make the recommendation that we have the proper documentation that we're looking at to make a sound and accurate recommendation. You shouldn't be making a recommendation really, to me, on something in 2018 or something that Finance have not provided us or anything that you need to provide us, so will assist us in making the recommendation on the funds, because the funds are coming from your.
Actually, they're not. So I guess I want to make that clear as well.
Yeah.
The funding would come from the Office of Management and Budget. So Finance does not provide funding.
Okay.
So perhaps that might be an entity we may want to involve in discussions, because that's the office that makes appropriations. Office of Finance, what we would do, the biggest part of our role would be making those disbursements to the candidates.
Okay,
we don't provide the funding.
Whoever that collaborates with the Fair Election Funds Commission should come through your office, because you are the head of us. So,
no, I think Ms. Williams, I think
not head, but providing the information for us to review.
Well, can I interject one more time?
Sure.
Audits and investigations comes under the legislative branch. Okay, and we also have policy and budget section that's an offshoot of that, which is under the legislature, and they go into fiscal impacts and things of that nature. And I think like you got the information in 2018 from Audits and Investigations. Audits and Investigations is still there, and I'm pretty sure that if you would need their assistance, the clerk of, or not the clerk of the council, but the council administrator would make them available. So that's not going to be a problem.
So I think I also want to clarify this point. So the Office of Finance has been assigned to us from an administrative capacity, but in reality, they only do disbursements. And
right, they do the operational disbursements, yes.
Right. And so to your point, and to I think what we're finding out on this call is that some of the things that we would be requesting and that we would needing wouldn't even come from the Office of Finance. It would come from the Office of Budget Management, as well as the Office of Audits and Investigation. And so then to the point that Ms. Williams is making, we need to make a request, right, to the Office of Audits to provide us with an updated report based on their previous investigation from 2018. But for the conversation that we're having today, we will be utilizing that as a baseline to have this conversation so we can have an understanding of what we're going to do moving forward. So Ms. Warner-Wiggins, if that could be sent out.
Well, can I interject?
Well, if I could make a point, I just wanted to interject at this point and say, nothing has changed in the bill for the amount of dollars that will be given in matching funds for a council candidate or for an at-large or for the executive candidate. The bill numbers remain the same. The analysis that was done was very simple. It just said how many candidates do we expect to run, and therefore how much money do we expect to need. There was no mention in that report of what it would cost to administer the program. So I think for us to say that somehow they should provide that money to us and we should take that into consideration is maybe beyond the task of the Fair Elections Commission. I mean, the bill has been written, there is the law, there is the program. And so, for us to delve into the nitty-gritty of what it would take to administer maybe a bit much, but maybe we can also find out what staffing did Montgomery and Howard need to run the program, and for the county administration to inform itself of that. And that was a question we asked Mr. Demarinis. But the numbers in the 2018 report are not obsolete. They are just reflecting what the bill says.
No, I understand that. I just want to make sure that, we have a commission member that brought up her concern. So I think that it's fair to ask them if there is any changes, if there is any updated information based on where we're at now, that they provide that. And then if it's fine the way it is, then they can write on a paper, hey, nothing has changed and it's all good and we don't lose any sleep. But to the point that Mrs. Williams is making, Mrs. Warner-Wiggins, if you can make that request this week so that we can have that because we will be making a recommendation as soon as possible for that number.
May I make one recommendation? I'm sorry, I have to interject because going right to offices of audits and investigations, you would have to, in the chain of command, go through the council administrator, and the council administrator would then order the Office of Audits and Investigations or the Office of Policy and Budget. Like I said, there's also an offshoot that's dealing with policy and budget that may be able to assist you with respect to how many bodies would be needed and things of that nature. But like I said, the request would go to the council administrator, and just be specific. We would need audits and investigations and maybe the Office of Policy and Budget, which within that area of the legislative branch, to assist us in providing information as a follow-up to the 2018 baseline information that you have.
That's fine.
Would that be about it?
That's fine. That's fine. Do we have, because I want to make sure I'm hearing everyone. Do we have any other questions before we move on to the presentation from Dan?
If I could just jump in, I just want to speak to the members of the public. Please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. I see someone with their hand up. I don't believe you'd be able to unmute and ask your question, but feel free to type your questions into the Q&A option at the bottom of the screen. If we are unable to get to your question during this meeting, we will follow up with an email. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Warner-Wiggins. Dan?
Okay, thank you. And I guess just for the attendees who aren't on the commission, earlier this week I sent just a memo to commission members with a few points, and let me just hit the highlights so that you have some background to follow what we're doing. Is that we are charged as a commission in the law now that we make a recommendation to the council for how much should be in the fund. So what we are to make the recommendations for what we think is the adequate funding for the fund that would be then used in the by the candidates in the various campaigns. And so the cycle, as we've heard, has already begun. And actually it'd be great for us to get feedback from the Office of Finance, but then also, I guess, glad to hear from Mr. Maddox about the policy and budget division within the legislative branch, because that's probably, the other arm that will be back and forth with a little bit. But to begin this, because that cycle is happening so rapidly, And as we've noted earlier, there's been just one allocation. The bill was passed in 2018, and the intention is, if you can read the background and all, was that the commission would be started the next year, and then every year make a recommendation. And that, so if this had been fully implemented as I think as some intended, there would have been appropriations made every year, because one of the reasons it was not enacted for the 2022 election was the thought that the lift to generate the funds would be too much. So this could be allocated and spread out over many more years. That was not done. We have what we have, and $500,000 is put in the fund this year. We have 2 budget cycles before the director of finance is supposed to declare whether we have enough money. So it seems like we should be making a recommendation based on those 2 budget cycles. It sounds like from maybe what we can look at the other counties and see if they actually put some money in at that last year during the election, or whether, but that's kind of very last minute. So we have 2 budget cycles. In the report, the fiscal report that was referred to before, there were 3 scenarios that were generated for how many candidates might be filing that would need funding. And the lowest estimate was done on a basis of 2 qualifying candidates for each office. And that would require $3.65 million in matching funds for that. The other scenarios were much more. I think, as we heard from the earlier presentation, Montgomery County had a lot more than that and higher, but Howard County had far fewer candidates. So it may be fine to make the assumption of 2 candidates. And I think that's where the one thing that, and just the discussion previously, and Ms. Williams, when you're raised the point, it seems to me that the numbers like 3.65 million shouldn't change if we're talking about the same assumption. So the same assumption would be 2 candidates per office. And so if we think that there will be more or less, then that number will change. And it's just a straight mathematical calculation. So part of that is, as we were just hearing before from the state elections officer, is whether there'll be more or less candidates. And some of that just depends on whether we're going to have open seats or not. And those assumptions, I mean, I think we welcome the input from the audits and, or policy and budget, but that still is a determination that's a value judgment, or and so we have to do the best we can to look at the other counties and then get any feedback possible. But it just seemed to me that since we've got that number, that's a reasonable starting point of having 2 candidates for each of these offices. And when you look at the numbers, and it's there's some really good charts and in that fiscal report about how much money is generated from, or like if you have a county executive candidate, $750,000, district council, $75,000. So the more people are running for the county executive would balloon the budget. So that's one of the things that we're going to have to really look at. And we just want to be able, I think it's important that we have a number that comes out so the candidates feel confident that there will be adequate funding, and they can actually make the decision to go in to do public financing. So therefore, I think it's important for us to take this seriously and come out with a recommendation that is, really substantial and makes a point that we're taking this seriously. We don't want to overfund it, although if more money is there and not used, it doesn't get spent. It stays in the fund, it comes back. And then also, one of my thoughts that I'd like to ask, around the other counties is that, so for us, we have just one amount for both the primary and the general. At least that's how the law reads, I think, to all of us. And if we have a number of people in the primary, that not everybody will make it through. So the people that lose in the primary will not be then tapping the rest of the funds. And they actually have to, if they have any excess funds, they have to return them. But anyway, so I think there's some, so far I think it's reasonable that 2 candidates per office is a reasonable start. And so that's, so I should stop now and just so we have a discussion about it. But my thought was that given the way the cycle is going and the number of people that are going to be asking for budget, their budgetary requests will be going in soon if they haven't already been made. We should be trying, if we at all can, to make that recommendation at our December meeting. That would be, I think, I know it's going to be a challenge, but I'm not sure what other information we would get for the fund. And then I'm wondering if it would be okay, we'll get feedback on staffing, but could we just maybe make the request that for the fund, for the amount to be allocated for the campaigns, plus staffing? And then if we could articulate the staffing as maybe like, whether it's, full-time equivalent or part-time, and we get guidance, I think we already got some from the state, like person that would work with the state from the Office of Finance, and then a person or contractor or part-time person that would be doing information and outreach. Because that is in the bill, I believe. The bill does state that Office of Finance, if I'm correct, staffs for liaison with the Board of Elections in the state, but also for doing information and outreach.
You're correct.
I appreciate your scenario of A, but it's unknown. It's 2, as you know, it's 4 people running for the county executive position, more than 2. And so I don't see where that would hold us up in December by asking them to, if it's the same of 2018, that's fine. They can just write us and send us. I don't see that's a problem. But I just don't like the fact that 2018 and now it's 2023, something may change. It may be 3, it may be 4. We don't know. And so since that office is there and they provided that information, I'm just saying that we should have it documentation for our files to help us assist in making recommendations with your recommendations and any other recommendations that we may have.
I think that's fair, and I think that we've already communicated. We're going to ask for that, Mrs. Williams, and we're going to ask that they provide that prior to our December meeting, because to be quite frank, they're based on what Dan as a teacher are saying and what we know the bill to be. There really shouldn't be too much change, but we also want to acknowledge, what you're saying. Like, let's get something on paper that says, hey, these are our 2023 projections on this. So I understand you, I hear you, and I think that that's fine. I also want to just, really reinforce that because, and again, this is not any fault of our own, but because we are behind the 8 ball in decisions that have to be made, even from the standpoint of the fiscal recommendations, particularly with this budget cycle coming up, we're going to have to make sure, that we're all, and thank you so much, Mrs. Williams, for your feedback and input. We all need to make sure that we're aware of the bill, because when we come to the December meeting, it's going to be like a recommendations discussion, so that we can submit that to the county council and in regards to our own charge. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. And I do hear what you're saying, Ms. Williams, and that request will be made this week so that we can get that before December. Yes, ma'am. I also just wanted to highlight that, we can always ask for more and have our recommendations based on, because when I looked at the report that we're referencing, they had three different scenarios. And I think the one that we're asking for is like the middle, the just right Papa Bear one, or what, you're shaking your head, Dan.
Oh, well, this is the least.
The least, yeah, the least. I'm
they
sorry,
had
the least
two
one.
much higher ones.
Right. I'm sorry, the least one. And so I just want to give context to the fact that we're asking for the least, and with the understanding that they don't have to accept our recommendation. They could say, hey, we're going to give less than the least. Or they could say, you know what? Democracy, and give more. I don't know. But that's definitely their decisions. We just want to make sure that our recommendations, to your point, Mrs. Williams, are aligned with the most clear and up-to-date information as possible. And I want to honor what Dan as a teacher is saying just about what the bill reflects as it stands right now. Go ahead, as a teacher.
Sorry, I just wanted to reiterate what you said, Jana, and that the other two scenarios in the report are also sort of guesswork, because you don't know how many candidates are going to run until they file and they run, and you don't know how many of those who run are going to be successful and qualify for a match. So these are all unknowns, and the only place we can get information is from what happened in other counties. Otherwise, it's, no office can actually give us that information. The good thing is that any money that is not used goes back into the public coffers. So it's not as if money is being spent, it's just that money is being put aside. And then it depends on what kind of a outreach we, the citizens of Prince George's, have to inform candidates of this. And I think the reason for two is because if you have one person who files publicly financed and you have a second person who comes up and you tell them, well, we don't have money for you, we only have money for one person, it sort of undermines the process, right? And so, and two per district, just because you want to be fair across each district, you want to be fair across each race. I think that's all the calculation that went into it when that original report was done. The largest number in that report assumes that everybody who has filed to run is going to run publicly financed, so it's like just ballparking the two ends. That's all that the report has done. It wasn't anything more than that. So I expect that's all we will get at this point, and we might want to dig into what happened in Montgomery County. And as Mr. Damaris was saying, 9 million or something along those lines, he said, was budgeted in Montgomery County, but only 4 or 5 was used, right? Because they overestimated how many people will run, how many people will qualify. So all those things we won't know until we run one cycle through this election.
And it's also important, so teacher, I think something else you brought up, it's also important to note, okay, so this calculation is based on 2 people running that will utilize public financing, right? And so we have people who run for office and they will not even, they're not going to touch public financing. So I just want to make sure that caveat is kind of brought to the forefront, because I also don't want us to be operating from the perspective of, like, I know the last election cycle, we had 4 people, including the incumbent, running for county executive, right? And, it might be the thought process that everybody who's running for a seat is going to use public financing. And that's really not the case. Everyone who's running for a seat will not use public financing, but there are people who would want to run. And we want to make sure that when we are sending our recommendations, the thought is around ensuring that those who would like to run that would utilize public financing would have those finances available. Dan, I saw you come off mute.
I could, yeah, and so I think one of the things is just having an understanding the commission about the fund, and it's not going to be easy for people to qualify, and so it really is going to require a commitment to be able to get to this point. And so I think, and let me just give you an example. So on page 2 of the audits and investigations report, there's a breakdown that, that summarizes the law. Says that for a county executive candidate to qualify would need 500 qualifying contributions. So it'd be 500 people giving less than $250 and with an aggregate total of $40,000. So just to qualify, they have to have 500 contributors, $40,000. I just did some envelope math. To get that, you would need 200 $5, 200 at $10, 50 people at $50, 50 people at $75, 50 people at $100, and 100 at $250. I mean, that is 650, people, but that gets you $40,000. I mean, you can break it down any way you want, but that's just an example. It's going to require, hundreds of contributions. And even at the district council level, to get one has to qualify 150 donors and $7,500 total to qualify. So that would be 150 averaging $50. So anyway, it's gonna take an effort, and I think with all that's going to go into this, we want to ensure that there's adequate funding so the program works, and that we don't get to I guess it would be July 1st of 2025, a year before the election, and the director of finance saying we don't have enough money, we're going to have to cut this back. I think that would be, I would think that would be a disaster, and that I just think that would be because you'd have candidates that have already declared and they're counting on that, and races would change. Anyway, I just think that would be a real stain on the reputation of the county that we want to avoid. So we want to have a good number. We want to do a good job of presenting it, in the best way we can. And anyway, I'm excited about it. I just think it's going to be, the dollars are going to be a challenge. And
well, doesn't finance control the dollar amount? If they don't.
Finance.
When you say the dollar amount, I'm sorry. If you're referring to the amount that's in the fund, is that what you mean?
Oh, he said he was afraid that if we get our recommendation and then finance comes back and says it's less than.
Oh, that's based on, okay, so we give our recommendation, Mrs. Williams, and then the county or the county executive decides if they're going to fund it all the way to our recommendation. If they do not by a certain time, that's when the Office of Finance says, hey, we ran the numbers, and, based on the recommendation that was given, we don't have enough or based on how many people have signed up to use public financing, we don't have enough. So that's really, it's under the Office of Finance in context too, if the recommendations that we submit based on the numbers that we give are not followed, and when people sign up, it's, aligned with the numbers that we gave, whether or not there's the funding. So we could give the numbers for 3.6 million. I'm just giving that number. We can give the number for 3.6 million for 2 people in each race. And and it's not funded on the county side. And then when the race comes up and there are 3 people for each race or 1 person for each race, it's in Office of Finance runs the numbers and says, look, we don't have the money.
Yeah, but I thought finance, and maybe I'm wrong, had a non-lapping fund where funds were sitting there. And so that's why I'm a little bit confused as to they would know how much fund that they would have available. That's why I said, why can't we get their input so we won't be giving incorrect recommendations. That's why I was thinking that we need their recommendations as to what they have in their budget or non-lacking budget, or what do they have financially that would substantiate us giving a fair estimate. And I don't understand.
This is coming out of the county budget.
Hold on, wait, let her the teacher, she's trying to finish her thought. Because I want to make sure that when she finishes it so that you're answering the question that she's having.
I just didn't understand that if they have a budget and they have a certain amount set aside, they could share with us what it is. And that's why I asked, could they give us input of what they think is fair and reasonable in this situation for the Fair Election Fund Commission?
Yes, ma'am. So right now in the Fair Election Fund, there's $500,000.
Right.
So that's how much the Office of Finance
Actually,
had.
400,000.
Oh. What happened to the money? Okay, 400,000. 400,000, Ms. Williams. We found it out together. It's 400,000.
I just wanted to ask Ms. Wiggins a question. I thought the initial appropriations by the executive was 100,000, and then it was upped during the budget negotiations, and the final budget was 500,000. That's what I was given to understand. Is that not correct?
The number I've gotten from the Office of Management and Budget is 400,000. That's what's sitting there available as far as I know. I've not been notified about an additional 100,000.
No, the 100 was there initially, and then the 100 was there when the budget went in, and then I thought when the budget passed it was 500. Yeah, thanks.
I think they increased it to 400,000, not added 400,000.
Oh, okay.
Why we need the facts. We need the facts. We don't need to assume. That's why I'm asking for documentation to support the decisions that we make.
Yes,
I think that's fair.
I just want to say, I think part of what this discussion is about is recommendations for the next fiscal year, which is July 1. And so, and to everyone's point, Ms. Parker, Mr. Smith, this is the time to start thinking about that because we are in the height of the budget request season. And so what we are considering now are appropriations for the FY25 year, which starts July 1. Someone in the member of the public asked what happens to funds that are not spent. Just to clarify, those funds do remain in the fund. The funds are non-lapsing. So whatever appropriations are given to the Fair Election Fund will stay there until they're dispersed to candidates, and whatever is not dispersed will remain in the fund.
Right.
I see Attorney Maddox says, come on the camera.
Yes, because I just want to clarify, Office of Finance is what they're letting you know is they operationally disperse.
Yes.
Now, who sets up the budget is Office of Management and Budget. So if you want to know the numbers, that Stanley Early shop, that's Office of Management and Budget. Finance will just go through the mechanics of the disbursement. Am I correct, Ms. Wiggins?
Yes, you have that exactly right.
Okay, so that it's actually, you probably have more OMB or Office of Management and Budget questions when you go into specifics as to how much is in the fund itself. Because
how much is in the fund? How much is in the fund currently? Because right now in the fund currently there's $400,000, and that's fine if we can get that verification from OMB. But we're also making recommendations based on the the new information, whatever information from the audits part in regards to what we need to ask to fully fund the election cycle for one of the scenarios. So I think making sure that that's clear as well. What Ms. Williams is asking for is, look, how much is currently in the fund that we know of? And then based off of that, including that in our calculations for our recommendations as we move forward. Additionally, making sure that we get any updated information, if there is, from the Office of Audits based on the 2018 one. And that's something Ms. Warner Williams, that's something Ms. Warner Wiggins is going to reach out this week to do. So I also want to clarify if there's any other information that we feel that we would need going into the December meeting, because we're going to be, sorry, I slipped up. We're going to be talking about we're going to be talking about the money and the recommendations that we need to provide them, because as Ms. Warner Wiggins stated, as Dan stated, as everyone has said on this call, we need to give them recommendations. And to Mrs. Williams' point, clear, fact-based recommendations, right? Coming up in this budget cycle, because that budget cycle is literally tomorrow. It's not tomorrow for the public watching, but that's how short the time frame is.
Right.
Okay.
Is there, can one of you from the staff just maybe give a really fast summary of just the budget process? So when can we expect the county executive to propose the budget? And then, in my understanding, it has to be adopted by the council by, I think, is it June 1st?
June 1st.
But
June.
it's going to come out,
by law, the county executive has to get the budget proposed, of course, to the county council by on or before March 15th. Is that correct, Ms. Wiggins? Just want to make sure I'm right.
It is.
They dropped the budget. And so, like you said, we have until June 1 to, the council has until June 1 to then approve the budget, or, and that's where the negotiations, of course, come into play, and the disposition of the budget from that point on. It is in July that they will have, Office of Management Budget will have loaded it in by July 1. Am I correct, Ms. Wiggins? Okay. And so go ahead.
I see the teacher. I want to get to the teacher, but I also want to just kind of highlight in all transparency that, yes, March 15th is when she has to get them the budget. June 1st is when they have to lock the budget in. But as we have seen, living in this county, being active community members, a lot of the presentations and a lot of the requests happen in December, January. That's when the requests happen way before then. And so we want to be honorable to that part of the process in regards to just understand that, yes, March 15th is her deadline. But she presents things to the public way before then. The county council says, hey, this is what we want way before then. And we want to kind of be in alignment with our request so that we're not popping up on May 15th, which is a great date, by the way. I just threw that out there. But we're not popping up on May 15th saying, hey, give us 3.65 million or 10.5 million. They're looking at us like, where were you back in January? We don't want to be in that situation. We want to be giving them that thought process beforehand. So thank you.
I'm just giving you the formal, the milestone dates. That's all.
I appreciate that, Attorney Maddox. So teacher?
Yeah, and adding to that timeline, as per CB 76, everybody who has an existing campaign finance account and wants to run publicly financed is required to file by 2 years before the primary. And the primary.
Let's move into that right now. Let's move into that right now. So go ahead.
So that change was made in CB 76 from CB 99, and it requires it has several requirements, and one of them is that if you had an open campaign account in the previous in this cycle, so if you ran, I guess you only have a campaign account if you ran. I don't know, maybe you can open a campaign account and not run, but you should at least declare you want to run for something, right? And you have reports filed. And so if you have that, and if you want to run publicly financed, there's a limit to how much you could have spent in the first 2 years, which is starting from January 1, 23 to December of 24. There's a limit on how much you could have spent or you could have acquired in that campaign account. And further, you have to file by 2 years prior to the primary, which would be end of June, I think, of 2024. So, candidates who are thinking about this also and may want to run publicly financed would also have to figure this out. And so would want to know how much we're recommending to put in the budget to know if they should, whether they should gather regular dollars as they have been doing from, from big donors or unions or wherever else they've been getting their money from, or if they should stop all of that and they should file publicly financed. So that's the other piece that comes into this, the date that comes into this consideration.
Since you brought that up, let's kind of move into that point of discussion. I'm always a fan of making sure that we honor people's time. And we are coming up on 7:47 now. So teacher, I know this is something that we had talked about before, and it's something that we need to bring to the attention of staff and the commission just in regards to conversation around timelines and deadlines. This is something I have been talking about pretty much the entire meeting, is that, again, of no fault of our own, we are behind the 8 ball, and the law has certain elements tied to it for candidates, right? Right now, and in coming up in this next election cycle. And then we just need to understand, or I guess kind of see what our responsibility is, or what the responsibility is in regards to informing those candidates. So teacher, did you want to lean into that?
Sure. So I shared the highlighted portion of draft 2 of CB 76 with folks on the Fair Elections Commission. I think I put it in the shared folder as well. So this refers to pages 4 and 5 in CB 76, where it talks specifically about applicant candidates, which means you are applying for public financing and you want to run a publicly financed race. So that's the applicant candidate. So if an applicant candidate has a campaign finance entity, which obviously they would have if they tried to run the previous cycle or any cycle before, then if you have not received any contributions or made any expenditures in the current election cycle, which began January 1 of 2023, you're all fine. So if you have a campaign account that is dormant, has been dormant since January 1 of 2023, then you can just go ahead and decide what you want to do and behave like any other candidate who is running for the publicly financed race for the first time. But if you have made contributions, or if you have received contributions or made any expenditures, then there are some restrictions that come into place. First is you must file 24 months before the primary election. And then during the current election cycle, there are dollar amounts that you should not have either spent or received into your, I think basically saying during the current election cycle, expenditures and transferred made from pre-existing campaign finance entity prior to filing notice of intent should not exceed certain dollar amounts. And the dollar amounts depend on the race. It's $25,000 for county executive, $10,000 for at-large council member, $5,000 for district council member. So this is in essence, since the cycle has already started, telling them after the fact that they should not have spent this amount or transferred it to any other campaign account. And then the third caveat is that which applies to everybody. You freeze your existing account and you start a new account for publicly financed dollars. So I think that also needs to be taken into account for this discussion. Best if you read through the language rather than my chanting it out here, because it's sort of, all these complicated ands, but just take a look at the bottom of page 4 and the start of page 5 in the document that was circulated.
Mr. Maddox, I think our question in this capacity is what is the responsibility of the commission in regards to these caveats? And then also, I guess, what is the responsibility in regards to this law in relation to informing candidates? Because
I'm listening. Go ahead.
Oh no, my child is just leaning over. I'm on a meeting. Okay. Anywho, now she said, "Why are you talking
Yeah, if I
about
could
that?"
just add to that question, Jana, I think
Yeah.
whose job would it be to inform, since this bill passed yesterday, and I presume it will be signed by the executive and enrolled, but whose job is it to inform current folks who have open campaign finance accounts that this is in place?
Yeah, I think that was my question. Like, who's supposed to tell them that? Because they need to know immediately, essentially. And then
Well,
also it needs to be disseminated to the public at large anyway.
Well, actually, and you'll see that actually in section 10-331G, where it even says the Office of Finance shall provide staff report for the commission to, and then you go subsection 2 here, provide information about the system to candidates and the public. So that it's actually already in the law in existence since 2018, actually.
But this
change was made now, right? So how do we inform candidates that this change, which could affect their future decision on whether or not they're able to run publicly financed, is told to them?
I think what he's saying is that it's the Office of Finance's responsibility. So the change that was made yesterday, it's now incumbent upon the Office of Finance to ensure that information.
Well, what they do is they provide staff report for the commission to provide information about the system to candidates and the public. So that's what they. So it's actually your authority, and they're there to help you implement that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Who has the list of folks with campaign accounts, their email addresses, and so on, and who would? So just to get to the nitty-gritty of that.
Hold on, Satitra. Let's clarify that. So what you're saying is that the Office of Finance would provide us with the reports, and then we would reach out to the candidates.
No, I said offer staff support.
I'm sorry, offer staff support.
Support for the commission to provide information about the system to the candidates and the public. So the commission will have the authority to provide the information, but you're using the Office of Finance as the mechanism. Do you understand what I'm saying? So they're assisting you in doing that.
Are you saying that the staff is going to provide the information because it's there within the system, and then they're going to submit it to the fair election chair?
No, I'm not saying all that. What I'm saying is that the staff will, that the Office of Finance will provide staff support for the commission to provide that information. So
I guess,
whatever information they have, they will give it to you, and you'll work with Office of Finance, and they'll serve as the mechanism for you to get that information out.
Okay, so Mr. Maddox, I just want to have this free and clear. So essentially, I'm gonna give this as the thought process. Will the Office of Finance reach out to candidates and let them know the information that they provided us with in relation to these timelines that they need to know about? Because that's really the long and short of what we're really asking. Like, is it incumbent upon us to reach out to the candidates with the information? Or is it the fact that, okay, we have this information, we can have it on the website, we can send it out as an email from the Fair
Well,
Elections Commission.
the law doesn't
but
get into that kind of granularity. What it
that's what we're trying
does
to figure.
is,
That's what we're trying to.
well,
Okay.
that'll be how the commission will interact with the Office of Finance, but the Office of Finance will provide staff support, be it, I guess it would be numbers or any number of things that can help get this information out. But as far as saying they're responsible for it, that doesn't say that. They're just saying they're providing staff support.
So I have a suggestion and a perspective would be that I think the commission, so maybe we just talk, I think the commission would like to notify or have candidates notified of this timeline. And I think it would be appropriate for this to essentially come from the commission. However, we need support to do that. So,
yeah.
And I don't think it needs to happen, obviously, tomorrow. So how about we kind of throw this back to the staff and say, this is something that we would like to do in a reasonable fashion, but we think it's important, and ask for a suggestion how to do it. Because it seems like, I don't know if it's the county board of elections has the list of all of the that, or if it's the state, but there must be a list of everybody that's got a open campaign finance account, and that could be found. Well, and then
that'd be in a state board of elections, I would think. So
maybe they provide that, and then we would then ask if the Office of Finance could generate, if we write the letter, could they put this out in January? Yeah. So the next month we could talk about it, and maybe in January would be a reasonable timetable that notice could go out.
Well, I think the notice should go out as soon as the bill gets enrolled after it's signed by the county executive, because we want people to know. We don't want to come back later and say you should not have spent money when we already know they should not have spent money. So I would say as soon as possible. And if there's a database with the emails of the folks with open campaign finance accounts, it should not be difficult to send them an email to this effect.
Yeah, and I think to the point that we're all making, it will be a request from Ms. Warner-Wiggins. So like Ms. Warner-Wiggins, I guess the way I'm viewing it is there is a fair elections email created, right? And then from that email, this information is disseminated to the list of candidates that need to know this information. And we can draft a letter, but in regards to actually sending it out and the mechanics of it, that is something that I would expect to come from staff. And I think that's really what I'm just trying to make sure
one thing, if I could jump in, I believe, I don't know the level of granularity, but the MD Chris system that Mr. DeMarinis mentioned would at least include anyone who has opened a campaign finance account. They'd be required to report it into MD Chris. Now, what I don't know is whether it would tell me if it's still open or not, but we would at least know who in the last election cycle and in the current election cycle has opened a campaign finance account, because they would be required to report it into MD Chris.
Right, and they're required to file annual reports and so on, right? So I guess what we would need is a database with the emails of folks, because that may or may not be available to us when we look at MD Chris. So whether it's the state board of elections one contacts or the county board has the same list or the same access, it should be. I'm assuming it's not very difficult to simply generate a list of names, emails, and then to send this form letter out to everybody, because we want to make sure that gets done in a timely fashion, so we're not undermining someone's ability to run.
And then
I'm just looking at the section 10.331 G, which talks about staff. And it says the Office of Finance shall provide staff support for the commission to do the following: work with the State Board of Election to administer the system and provide information about this system to the candidates and to the public.
Yeah,
clearly
that's correct.
Identifies that.
And that, yeah, and I think we're all saying the same thing different ways, which oftentimes happens in these conversations. So I think we have agreed that staff that we'll generate the letter. That's fine, and we could talk about it. And we, as a commission, can have a consensus on the letter that's going out. But staff, in regards to the technical capacity, can create an email and send that email out to all the candidates. Additionally, Ms. Warner Wiggins, I want to just highlight, and we're at 8 o'clock. I just want to highlight. I want to tell her a thank you, because I know that she's already talked about the limited capacity that she has to do this, but she's still helping our commission as much as she can. We are supposed to have a website in regards to our particular fair elections, so this information can go on that website as well. So we would have the information on the website. We would post it on those links that she has sent us in the email. We should post this information there. And then we should also send the letter out, to Satitra's point, honestly, as soon as possible. We already know the dates. We already know like the legislation around that. So we should, try to draft it and send it out as soon as possible. And I want to say that we are at 8:01, and I want to be respectful of the commission's time as well as the staff's time. So if you guys have any more questions within the next 5 to 7 minutes, if we could wrap that up so that we can let them go.
I just want to let the commissioners know that I am working with our Office of Information Technology to get a dedicated fair election fund website. Right now, the information is posted on Finance's website. So just the meeting agenda, for instance, and the registration information for these meetings is there now. But I am hoping to have a separate website where, as Ms. Parker mentioned, we would be able to post not only meeting information, including these videos of each meeting, but also just general information about the program. I also want to mention that I've been working on a draft version of the summary guide that Mr. Demarinis mentioned each county would have. And I'm doing it with track changes so that to anyone that's interested, we could see how I'm changing it. I'm using Montgomery County's summary guide as a template. So you can see where potentially where differences are if you care to view it with track changes. One thing I want to say you might want to consider discussing at your next meeting is we do not have specified in the legislation a deadline for filing the notice of intent. So that might be something to consider as well, sooner rather than later. So Montgomery County's deadline to file that notice of intent is April 15th, prior to the primary election. Howard County has it designated as the same date, the same deadline to file to run for elected office, which is it's specified as something like the last Tuesday in February. Let me see. The last Tuesday in February in the year in which the primary election is held. So that's the deadline to file for candidacy. That is also Howard County's deadline to file the notice of intent. So another point the commission may want to consider is establishing an official deadline to file the notice of intent, because that is not specified in the legislation.
Okay, let's make sure that that's on the agenda as well. Satitra?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think that's a really good idea. Thank you for raising that, because April seems really late given this is the July timeframe for the election. And why would you, I mean, you would think if you're going to file only in February to run, then you should know whether you're going to file publicly financed or not, given all the preliminary work you have to do to start getting funding. So maybe we should go with the Howard County. It's just off the top of my head, suggestion at this point.
Okay, and then Dan, and then we're gonna go ahead and close out.
Yeah, just following up, there's one observation, hearing from Suchitra, the change that was made in the bill for kind of the hoops that candidates with existing accounts, it's more complicated. And there's a lot of hoops now they have to go through, or deadlines that they have to be aware of. I would think that is going to limit the number of existing office holders who will go to public financing. And just people with accounts already, if they can't make that deadline by this July 1, anyway, I think it's going to reduce that. So I think that's just a factor that is going to limit. Just another thing to think about as we're thinking about like 2 candidates per office. I would say we're not going to have that many, which I think is unfortunate. It'd be really great if some of the existing candidates, 1 or 2, or some would run, would be a great example and promote the program. But I think we might have fewer.
Yeah, we don't know where to go and whether current candidates actually intend to run publicly financed, or if they've already had a lot of fundraisers and raised a lot of money, they never really intended to run publicly financed, because this legislation has been in the books for a long time, and you have to freeze your existing account in order to run publicly financed. So if they were existing candidates who are currently in office, who intended to run publicly financed, they probably, would be thinking about going that route. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It could limit the number of existing candidates who run, but maybe they weren't intending to run publicly financed anyway. So we don't know, right? We can't make that determination.
Yeah, and like I said, let's have that on the agenda for next week to talk about a little bit more. Oh, I'm sorry, next week. Next month, y'all, everything's blending together. But no, so I just want to go ahead and close out. First of all, thank you all commissioners for coming on. Thank you, Dan, as a teacher, for all the information that you provided. Thank you, Ms. Williams, for all your pointed questions. We appreciate you. And yes, ma'am. Thank you. We appreciate you as well. Thank you to the staff. Always thank you to the staff. I'm trying to get y'all out of here at 8. We'll see if we can do that next month. And I will talk to everyone next month, and we'll talk via the emails. I just want to highlight that the teacher has put together a wonderful Google folder, which has a massive information. I can already see Mrs. Williams has gone through it. And so I just encourage everyone to go through it. It has a lot of information. It has videos. It has all the things to help understand this bill and to have questions and dialogue, particularly as next month we will be talking about recommendations for money, for that money. And so just want to encourage you to do that. And then we'll all be chatting on email in regards to kind of the agenda and other points of information that we need to know. All hearts and minds are clear as we roll out.
Yeah.
Okay. Guys, be safe until the next time. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.